Welcome to the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. I'm Randy Karraker. It's great to have you with us, as it is every Sunday night. And the Blues just finished the off-season transaction period with free agency, trades, the NHL draft, and, of course, prospect camp. And here to talk about it from 101 ESPN, the host of the Blues pre-intermission and post-game shows and co-host of BK Ferrario, middays on 101 ESPN, Alex Ferrario. Good to see you, sir.
Absolutely. Great to be here with you, Randy.
Well, a lot has transpired over the course of the last few weeks, and I want to start with this. And by the way, Alex was at the draft, and we're going to talk about the Blues draftees in a moment, but the big news for fans of the Blues during this offseason has been the trade, a sixth-round draft choice to Philadelphia for center Kevin Hayes, who arrived in Philadelphia as a free agent a few years ago, and now they're in a rebuild, and they're willing to move a guy like Kevin Hayes. Tell us about him and what he brings to the table.
So he brings a lot. So the main things were finding a centerman, and something that Craig Berube preached a lot of, Randy, was size. So let's start with the size. 6'5" Kevin Hayes is coming to the St. Louis Blues, and that's good, especially when your coach was preaching towards the end of the season last year, we need more guys that are willing to go to the front of the net and fight for those goals. And that's what a Kevin Hayes is. When you're 6'5", you have the ability to do that. But it was also the centerman. And this was the part that you knew that the Blues were targeting. You just didn't know who, because what Doug Armstrong was speaking of was somebody in the age of 24 to 29 years old with term on his contract. Well, Kevin Hayes is 31 years old, but Kevin Hayes is also a natural centerman, and the decisions were shift Pavel Buchnevich to a centerman and look for a winger, where Buch has played center, but it's not his natural position, or bring in somebody who can play the center position, and Kevin Hayes is that. I mean, he's a career about 50% face-off guy. He's played for the New York Rangers, for the Winnipeg Jets, most recently the Philadelphia Flyers. So you're bringing in that centerman to keep Buch on the wing, which is a good thing for the Blues. You're bringing in size, but you're also bringing in some experience, because Doug Armstrong talked a lot about how this team has more maturing to do. Well, a guy who's been to the playoffs 5 separate times, and a guy who has been a part of some really responsible teams in the Rangers, that's going to provide that maturity that he needs in that locker room.
And you mentioned that Hayes' age kind of exceeds what Doug Armstrong had talked about, but Doug Armstrong has this incredible ability to get other teams to pay his players.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, let's go through this right now. Jakub Vrana at 50% salary. It seemed like they were going to get 50% salary for Kevin Hayes and also get another player that Philly was going to eat. So Doug just knows when to target a team that's in the middle of a rebuild. But look, to bring in a Kevin Hayes who's making somewhere around $3.75 million for the next 3 years, you weren't going to find a better player for that price via free agency. And that's the part that I think Doug realized. To get somebody of higher ilk, you were going to have to give up a lot more assets, which for a team that's in the middle of a retool, Randy, you don't want to be giving up a lot of first and second round picks if you're going to be bad for the next couple of years. But what you did was you got a future 6th round pick for a guy who's been multi-20 goal scorer, a 31-year-old, so still in his prime, and you got him for $3.75 million with the other team paying it. That is another hamburglar moment for Doug Armstrong.
And as our friend Jeremy Rutherford reported in The Athletic, the initial iteration of this trade had the Blues sending a number 1 pick and Torrey Krug to Philadelphia in exchange for Hayes and Travis Sanheim. Krug invoked his no-trade clause, so the Blues wind up trading the number 6 for Hayes. But I'm intrigued by the interest in Travis Sanheim. What would he have brought to the table? What would he have given Doug Armstrong that Doug Armstrong didn't already have on his roster?
Size. That's the biggest thing that Travis Sanheim, pun intended, that he was bringing, that they were trying to, you don't want to say rid themselves of, but maybe make it lesser on the side of the Blues, because they got a lot of smaller stature left-handed defensemen. Torrey Krug, Nick Leddy, Scott Perunovich, really the only guy that the Blues have in their system, Randy, that would be on the left side that's above 6 foot, and Tyler Tucker plays bigger than what he is Marco Scandella. And they need more of it, frankly, and that's something that they struggled with, especially with the amount of backdoor tap-ins we saw this past season. So a 6'3" Travis Sanheim, who was under term for the next 8 years. So that was the other thing that Doug really wanted, somebody who would be available for this team, and you wouldn't have to go into free agency and renegotiate. But when you think of Colton Parayko, you think of Jay Bouwmeester,
right,
because that was the pair that was so successful. And since Jay Bouwmeester retired, they've been searching for the next Bowmeister to play with Parayko. They've gone through Mikkola, they've gone through Scandella, they've done Krug, they've done Leddy, they even tried Falk on the left side.
Right.
So this to me was them trying to find that consistent partner for Colton Parayko, and unfortunately they weren't able to get it done.
And so the Blues wind up with Kevin Hayes and all three of their first-round draft choices, and Alex Ferrario was in Nashville, Tennessee for the draft. And at number 10, the Blues get Dalibor Dvorsky, and I need to make sure that I'm right here. He was playing in Sweden,
Yes.
played center in Sweden, but not a Swedish center.
Absolutely, yeah. So he played in Sweden because that's where, frankly, in his opinion and his agent's opinion, was the best opportunity for growth. And when you're playing against men in the Swedish Hockey League, you're going to grow as an 18-year-old. And that's the part for me with Dalibor Dvorsky is this was a player that did not look out of place playing against those men. And to give people a little bit of background with this, Randy, out of the drafts, I spoke with multiple scouts and one prospect analyst for The Athletic, Scott Wheeler, and picking his brain about some of the players that the Blues could select at number 10. I brought up the name Dalibor Dvorsky because I was high on him. And both Scott Wheeler and two scouts told me, don't worry about Dvorsky. He won't be there for the Blues.
Wow.
So when I heard that, I'm thinking, oh, well, this is going to be a bust of a draft. So I'm starting to think of other guys that could pop up. And then when the Detroit Red Wings took Nate Danielson at number 9, I couldn't believe it. So I got a little too excited on the radio. May have showed my side on that. But Dalibor Dvorsky, among a lot of scouts' opinions, with the exception of Connor Bedard, Adam Fantilli, and Leo Carlsson, the guys that were selected in the top 3, Dalibor Dvorsky is the most ready to play at the NHL level. And that is a win for the Blues to select that player at 10th overall. Now, I don't expect him to be a part of this NHL roster. Frankly, they'll probably send him back to Sweden to play again this upcoming season. But you're talking about a guy that they just selected who could play at this level right away, but they're going to slow play it here so that when he comes over, he's going to be a top 6 forward.
And so the Blues got the prime guy at number 10, still had 2 picks left, though. And at number 25, they take another centerman, Otto Stenberg, who is, by the way, Swedish and playing in Sweden.
That is correct. Yeah, Otto Stenberg, for those that don't know, I would identify him as a pure goal scorer. To me, and watching film, because I didn't know much about Otto Stenberg when he was selected, so I had to do a little diving myself into it. It reminds me a lot of David Perron. When you see this Otto Stenberg get set up and tee up for the one-timer, that's who I immediately think of. But Otto Stenberg, just talking with him, he surrounds his game with offense, and that's how he is. He's fast, not the biggest guy, but man, does he have a sneaky good shot. So this, to me, was replenishing the minor league system, Randy, in terms of depth at forward, that you have goal scorers that when you need those, because frankly, they're not easy to find in the NHL, you have them growing in your system.
Safe to say, though, that if he's centering Kyrou, you better have a Selke Award winner on the other wing, right?
That would be more the Dalibor Dvorsky side of things. That's the two-way forward that you're searching for.
Okay, so the draft passes, the trade time passes, the free agency passes, but the Blues head to prospect camp, and Alex Ferrario is going to tell us about who he saw on the ice there, plus coaching changes that the Blues have made. That's coming up on the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. Good to have you with us on the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2 with Alex Ferrario of 101 ESPN. I'm Randy Karraker, and the Blues just concluded a prospect camp last week. And Alex, not only the draft choices in, but a lot of the Blues' young players. And we talked about the 3 first-rounders. Now you've had a chance to see them on the ice. Did anybody really catch your eye?
Well, we talked a little bit about Dalibor Dvorsky. He was the one that I was most impressed by for just being selected 10th overall. But then, Randy, the ones that popped out are the ones that all Blues fans continue to talk about. It's the big 3, and Jimmy Snuggerud, Zachary Bolduc, and Zach Dean, who was acquired from the Vegas Golden Knights. All 3 of these guys, watching them at prospect camp, were better than the group they were on the ice with. And to me, that's the step you have to accomplish when you're ready for training camp. And training camp is going to be when they're going up against the Schens and the Buchnevich and Kyrous and Thomases. But when you're excelling against other prospects, that tells you that you're ready for that next step. And that's what those 3 did throughout that prospect camp week.
And despite that being the case, Snuggerud has decided to return to college for another year. What do you think that he needs to improve on? What does Snuggerud need to work on in this next year at Minnesota?
I'm not even sure if it's work on more than it's just experience. To me, if this Blues team was in this competing window, let's say like they were in 2016 2018-19, Randy, Snuggerud might be the guy in Robert Thomas's role, where they bring him in, play him on a third-line role, and you can groom him as you go. But because this Blues team is in a little bit of a retool, and because this Blues team has a lot of guys right now at the winger position, when you talk about the Veranas and Kapanens and Sods and Neighbors, you don't want to have too many guys that you're trying to grow. And so rather than, for those that don't know, Snuggerud couldn't go to the minors. He has to go back to college if he's not on the NHL team.
Right.
So rather than put him on the NHL team and keep him on the bench and in and out of the lineup, you send him back to his college team where he will be the top guy, goes back to Minnesota, plays with his number one centerman in Logan Cooley. I mean, you could see a Snuggerud and a Hobie Baker conversation this upcoming season for how good he was as a freshman. And to the Blues mindset, this is a guy who has all of the offense you can ask for. Now you just want more experience so that next offseason, when we're going through prospect camp and then heading into training camp, if there's a position open at the wing, that's where Snuggerud can really capitalize and possibly take that opportunity.
And you mentioned Jake Neighbors. We've heard Neighbors and Bolduc, just those names together for a long time now. We've seen Jake Neighbors at the NHL level for a couple of years, although he's had his injury issues. But we still haven't seen Zach Bolduc here. What did he show in prospect camp?
So Bolduc showed all of the offense. And what I mean by all of the offense is he did everything you can ask for from a forward who you want to be a goal scorer. He's got a sneaky, quick wrist shot. He's really fast in terms of think Jordan Kyrie's speed, but he's also got the highlight reel ability plays like we've seen from guys like Jordan Kyrou at the NHL level. So on the offensive side of things, there's nothing to fret. And frankly, when you put up 100-plus points in junior hockey and win the Memorial Cup and win the championship in your junior league, you're doing something right. But for those that might have forgotten, go back to last training camp and preseason. Bolduc didn't have the best camp, and both Doug Armstrong and Craig Berube said he's got more to work on, specifically on the defensive side of his game. So he went back and worked with his coach, Patrick Waugh, and he feels he's ready for that. That is remain to be seen. We'll see that once you get into actual training camp, but at least at prospect camp, the offense was very noticeable, and if he's not ready for the NHL, he'll start in the minors and then get those opportunities as the season moves along.
And Bolduc is a smallish sort. Is that a good term?
I think he did put a little bit more weight on him and grew a little bit. At least that's what Tim Taylor, who's in charge of the player development, had said. I would say he was probably around like 6 foot before or when he got to this prospect camp. Prior to that, I think they drafted him when he was 5'11". So they are still growing at 18, 19, 20 years old, which you expect him to. But he got a little bit bigger than what he was last year, which is always a good thing for somebody you want to be playing in your NHL.
And a couple of other players I want to touch on. Number one is the player that the Blues got for Ivan Barbashev, who, by the way, re-signed with Vegas 5 years, $25 million. But Zach Dean was a former first-round draft choice of the Golden Knights that the Blues get in exchange for Barbashev. What did you see from him?
Yeah, and our producer on Blues Hockey and for BK and Ferrario, Grant Francis, he talked with Dean after prospect camp, and Dean said he actually plays his style like an Ivan Barbashev, which is kind of funny that those two were traded for each other. But I saw from Dean, and it was a very small sample size because he had some equipment issues at prospect camp. His skates weren't the right skates, but he still was very impressive. And when you talk about a centerman who's got a little bit of feistiness to his game, smooth in the faceoff dot, and did score 30-plus goals in his junior team this past year, I think this is the most likely candidate, Randy, to steal a spot on the NHL roster in training camp. So to me, a fourth-line center role seems like a perfect opportunity for a Zach Dean if his camp goes well, because he could also start in Springfield and just be the number one centerman and groom at that spot. But if he outplays guys like Nikita Alexandrov or guys like Nathan Walker, this could be a player that the Blues say we have to keep him on our roster. And frankly, if you come in as a 20-year-old with that type of attitude, that could be pretty refreshing for this Blues team, especially on the fourth line.
Now, last year after the season, the Blues made some changes to their coaching staff. Craig McTavish and Mike Van Ryn relieved of their duties, and the Blues have replaced them with Michael Babcock, son of the former and current and longtime NHL head coach, along with Mike Weber on defense. But these young players that you're talking about, these young forwards, they're going to have a lot of face time with Michael Babcock. Tell us what he brings to the table.
Absolutely. So Michael Babcock, for those that don't know, brought in as the skills coach for the Blues. And when people hear skills coach, they're thinking, oh, so he's just going to be out on the ice working on one-timers with these guys. He's going to have a say in the offense. But I also believe when you bring in a guy like Michael Babcock, who's just recently done with playing, he was coaching in college for a couple of years before the Blues brought him in. We all remember Doug Armstrong talking about finding ways to identify more with these younger players. And when you think younger players, Randy, you've got Thomas and Kyrou and Verana, and now you've got Neighbors, and you've got the Buldukes and the Snuggeroods and the Deans coming in. You got to have somebody who can get those players' voices. And unfortunately, it just didn't seem like that was working with Craig McTavish. So this Michael Babcock hire, to me, is somebody who's going to help on the offense. He's probably going to have a little bit of a say on the power play with Steve Ott. But more so than anything, he's going to be a guy that these younger players that are coming to the Blues and are already on the Blues have a better relationship with in terms of on the ice and kind of getting the message through to them rather than what they've been trying to do.
And then last year on defense, fair to say that players like Krug and Leddy and Parayko didn't get their talents maximized under Mike Van Ryn. Enter Mike Weber, who not only has the veteran guys, but also is going to be working with Scott Perunovich and Tyler Tucker, two youngsters who have signed one-way deals and are going to be with the Blues.
Yeah, and when you relieve a Mike Van Ryn of his duties, who's a Stanley Cup champion with the Blues, it's a tough decision to make. But it just seemed like the message was getting stale with the defensemen in terms of what they were trying to accomplish. And it makes sense when you think of the core that Mike Van Ryn had, that was Pietrangelo and Bouwmeester and Parayko and Edmondson, the Cup team.
Sadly, a lot of people could have coached that.
Yes, a lot of size when you got tree trunks out there. But now when you talk about a different group of defensemen, it seems that they needed a different message. And you bring in a Mike Weber, who frankly is closer to the game now than what Mike Van Ryn was. Mike Van Ryn, of course, has been coaching for a while, but Mike Weber retired back in the 2017-2018 season. As a player, yes. Played for the Buffalo Sabres. Last year, he was the minor league assistant coach for Buffalo's AHL team. So to me, you have somebody who has got a different message for a group of players that are trying to play in this era of hockey, which it's a lot of speed, it's a lot of highlight reel goals, it's less the chippy, punch him in the face Chris Pronger style that we saw back in the 90s. Now you're bringing somebody in who has played in the NHL level against these types of players. So Mike Weber is going to provide that message to these guys, but he's got some familiarity with Steve Ott, and of course Craig Berube was the one that handpicked him. So you got some relationship on the side of the coaching staff as well.
That's Alex Ferrario. He is the host of Pre and Post Game and Intermissions for Blues Hockey on 101 ESPN. I'm Randy Karraker, and this is the 101 on Sports. Coming up, the Blues missed the playoffs last year, but they're going to be a cap team again in 23-24. So what'll it take for the Blues to get back to the playoffs? Alex will tell us coming up on the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. Welcome back to the 101 on Sports. Glad to be joined by Alex Ferrario. You hear him middays on 101 ESPN. He has the BK and Ferrario show from 11 to 2, and he's also the pre- and post-game host for St. Louis Blues Hockey on 101 ESPN, talking some Blues with the conclusion of the draft and free agency and the prospect camp. And let's look ahead a little bit, Alex, to this 23-24 season. It's going to be a different look Blues team because of the moves they made down the stretch last year. Obviously, no O'Reilly, no Tarasenko, no Barbashev, but you have Verana, you have Kapanen, you've added Kevin Hayes. You're going to have a couple of young defensemen. Let's start between the pipes, though, because I think everybody that was around the team last year, even though the numbers weren't great for Jordan Binnington, everybody kind of thought Jordan Binnington had a really good playoff quality year. If he has the same year in 2023-2024 that he had last year, but the play in front of him is better, can he be a playoff goalie again?
Absolutely, he can. And Jordan Binnington, to me, and the numbers don't show it, Jordan Binnington was as solid as you can ask for a regular season goaltender. Frankly, in my opinion, that was one of his best regular seasons since the year he was an all-star, pre-COVID. Jordan Binnington suffered a lot from the defense that struggled, and I think that's why we saw such a change in the coaching staff, and you brought in some different players that can bring a little bit more defensive awareness. But if there's one thing we know about Jordan Binnington, Randy, he finds ways to keep his team into games all season long, albeit loses his temper every once in a while, but sometimes it's entertaining. But when he's in the postseason, he's going to give you a chance to steal series. We saw that against Minnesota 2 years ago, and we saw that against Colorado. So for Jordan Binnington, it's really just par for the same course for him. It's go back into the same offseason routine, come into the regular season. Now he's got a little bit more competition, which can be a good thing for Jordan Binnington. But if he knows he's the number one guy, and you provide him sturdy enough defense, I think you could be talking about one of the top half goaltenders in the league.
And you mentioned the competition. nothing against Thomas Greiss, but in the little I saw of Joel Hofer last year, I think that Joel Hofer brings more to the table as a backup goalie than Thomas Greiss did.
He did. And Thomas Greiss, unfortunately for him, he just got the short end of the straw every start because the defense really struggled with Thomas Greiss in net. But if you just watch, first of all, Joel Hofer's 6'5". So, I mean, you got a big goaltender in there, i.e. Ben Bishop. But Joel Hofer, he provided some spark to that Blues team last year that I think they needed in terms of somebody who came in and stole a game. We all remember that shutout that he posted against the Winnipeg Jets. He's going to get the Blues back to like what they had when it was Binnington and Allen and Binnington and Husso.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the sense of where you feel like Hofer is the number one guy, but it's not going to be where Jordan Binnington's playing 60-plus games and Hofer's only playing 15 or so. I think you could see a healthy split between these two sides, and frankly, that friendly competition that Binnington's had with Jake Allen and had with Ville Husso, it forces him to be on his game, and when he's not, that gives the Blues the opportunity to go to somebody else because, unfortunately, Thomas Greiss just wasn't that guy for the Blues.
All right, let's touch on a couple more things. Obviously, we all know that the Blues need to play a more connected game, and they do have talent. They had a lot of leadership walk out the door, though, with Vladdy Tarasenko. He wore an A. Ryan O'Reilly was your captain. Barbashev had experience to lead. Who fills that void of leadership in the room?
Braden Shen, to me, is going to be the main guy. I would believe if they give a C, it's going to be to go to Braden Shen. You're going to be talking about Falk and Parayko, the guys that have worn the A's. I think Binnington's going to have a little bit of say in that. Buchnevich. Kevin Hayes is going to come in and bring that maturity and leadership. But look, this season is going to be Thomas and Kyrou becoming leaders. That's what Doug Armstrong, that's what Craig Berube both want with the contract extensions. You've shipped out the leadership. Now you're telling the younger players, this is your team now. Take advantage of it. So Thomas and Kyrou, to me, are also going to be a part of this leadership core that they're hoping to instill back into that locker room.
Last 35 seconds here. We mentioned at the end of last segment that the Blues are spending to the salary cap. Will that result in playoffs, whether it's the first seed or the eighth seed? Can this particular group of players get the Blues back to the playoffs?
I believe that they can. It's not going to be winning the division. Frankly, it's not going to be the top two in the division. But if you look at the state of the Western Conference, Randy, specifically the Central, Nashville has gone into tank mode. Arizona is still in their rebuild. Winnipeg is selling off pieces. You're amongst Colorado, Dallas, and Minnesota. That's who you are a part of. So right there, you're talking about fighting for the third spot, but then you go to the other division. Calgary's unsure of where they're at. You've got only a few teams that are in the top three there. So this Blues team, if they fix a couple of areas that need to be tweaked, could be one of those 7-8 wild card teams. And if they outperform, could be talking about a top three in the Central.
Thank you, Alex.
Randy, thank you, sir.
Alex Ferrario, you hear him every day, 11 to 2 on 101 ESPN, and that is the 101 on Sports. I'm Randy Karraker. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week right here on Fox 2.